My name is Hannah Lakani, and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Chicago's Zooming with the Aldermen series of interviews. The League was founded 101 years ago, right here in Chicago, and we're a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in our government. We work to increase the understanding of major public policy issues, and we influence those issues through education and advocacy. The Chicago League is actually one of hundreds of leagues all over the country. These particular interviews with the aldermen are part of our efforts to educate people about those who represent us in setting the policies and ordinances that govern us here in Chicago. And today, our guest is Alderman La Spata of the First Ward. Welcome, Alderman. We appreciate you taking this time to be with us.
Thank you, Hannah. Really glad to be here.
We would like to share that we have provided the aldermen a copy of the questions that I'll be asking ahead of time. First, we want to start with showing you a map of all the 50 wards in Chicago. You can see that the city is divided into 50 different wards, and the cursor will show you in a second the location of the first ward. And then we'll go ahead and move over to a map of just Alderman La Spata's ward. So here is a map of the first ward of which Alderman La Spata represents. Now we'll go ahead and dive into our questions.
Hannah, should I read the questions aloud, or are they going to be popping up on the screen? What is the best way?
I'm going to ask the questions. I'm just going to wait for the screen share to end, just so that we are spotlit again.
Perfect.
Excellent. So Alderman, if you could start with telling us a little bit about your ward. Where is it? What are the main boundaries? What neighborhoods does it include? And tell us about the makeup. Is it residential, commercial, or industrial?
It's a really fascinating mix of all of those, actually. So the first ward is on the northwest side of the city of Chicago. It is, because of how it was designed, a very far-reaching gerrymandered ward. You can live over at Grand and Ogden or up at Cortland and Lawndale and still be in the first ward. Residents who may not think of themselves as being in the same political jurisdiction just because of how wide-ranging it is. But roughly, the first ward has pieces of the kind of the eastern side of the Logan Square community going into Westtown and Humboldt Park. It kind of curves down Western Avenue into Ukrainian Village and into Westtown before coming back up into Wicker Park. So very broad ranging, but fascinating because it includes a wide range of types of residential communities, from the taller transit-oriented developments at California and Milwaukee, Ashland and Milwaukee, to the mixed income CHA community at Lathrop Homes. And then we have blocks that are incredibly racially and socioeconomically diverse spaces because of what gentrification can be. You have $1.5, $1.7 million single family homes directly across from scattered site CHA housing. You know, in the mix of all this, we have some really vibrant, beautiful commercial corridors from Milwaukee Avenue and Division Street in Wicker Park to the Milwaukee Avenue stretch in Logan Square that has some phenomenal stores and restaurants. We also have some great still industrial spaces in the first ward along Hubbard Street and Kinsey Avenue. That industrial corridor is very much still alive with new small business incubators creating new light manufacturing jobs every year. So yeah, a really fascinating set of communities and interests to get to represent.
Yeah, your ward sounds a little bit like a microcosm of the larger city. It seems very diverse in terms of its needs and its makeup. So what would you say are some of the key issues facing the people in your ward?
I think some of the big issues are the piece of it being a microcosm is true. And sometimes I feel like if we can solve these issues within the first ward, we may be pointing a direction for the whole of the city. But in terms of how can a community be affordable, stable, sustainable, and safe, these are the big concerns. We have hundreds of residents who, as we come out the back end of this pandemic, are facing potential eviction and foreclosure. We had, at the best of times, thousands of residents who didn't know where their next rent check were going to come from. We have seen more than our share of public safety and crime issues, even as we've seen robberies and burglaries decline over the course of the pandemic. We had many more shootings and homicides and instances of gun violence than we would ever expect or want to. And even one person getting shot in a community is too many people getting shot. Far too many carjackings last year and this year that require a holistic set of solutions to be able to solve. And I would add to this the challenges facing us related to climate change and sustainability. As our climate heats up, as our weather gets more erratic, we are going to see more storm water, more intense storms, higher temperatures in the summertime that are going to make it much more difficult for all of us, but particularly for our seniors. How we mitigate and adapt to the challenges of climate change, maybe it's not a ward level issue, but it is one of the generational issues that I feel like my generation of the city council really has a mandate to confront up front.
I can hear your passion and energy around why you wanted to be on the city council. I'd love to hear, when did you first join? What made you decide to run for alderman in 2019? It sounds like a lot of your values align with the work that you're doing. And I'm curious, do you have any other employment right now?
Anyone who's pulling down 2 jobs as an alderman, I have no idea how they do it. There is more than enough work for everyone to be a full-time alderman, which is what I am. And it's the dream job for me for this time in my life. I had spent all of my postgraduate years after I graduated college back in 1999 working on community development and affordable housing issues in the Logan Square community, in part because it was personal for me. I think through the whole of my 20s, there probably wasn't a year that I spent less than 50% of my income on my housing costs. Housing is something that impacts every aspect of our life, whether we're close to parks and good schools, whether we're close to transit that can help us get to the job opportunities that we need. It was really important in Logan Square, which was and is undergoing wide-ranging trends related to gentrification. But unfortunately, I found myself represented by an alderman in the first ward who, leaving conversations of his character aside, was really a ceiling on the kind of change we could hope to see in our community. I was in meetings with him where he would take a stack of 3,000 signatures. I remember this clearly, as thick as this budget book I'm holding on my desk, and set it aside like it was nothing and just tell people, well, this is moving forward. And later we would find out it was, well, naturally, because north of $5,000 in campaign contributions had been put in his account and money was governing his decisions more than the will of our community. And sometimes that makes people angry. Sometimes it makes them dejected and hopeless that democracy is even worth participating in. And when you see that, that's when you know that change is really needed. And so I really spent about 4 years trying to get ready for an opportunity like this, trying to understand, going from like community-based issues to electoral politics. How does that function? I went back to grad school and in the process of finishing my master's in urban planning and public policy, I try to prepare to be the kind of alderman that I hoped for. And even now, that's what I try to judge myself against. When I think about who I was, how I functioned, how would the leader and organizer that I was hope to see this alderman functioning? And so that's something I continue to think about.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story with us. I think that as we have thought about American politics, over the last 4 to 6 years, it has been a place where um, I'm excited to hear about how you're holding yourself accountable. I'm excited to hear that you are still learning because I think you represent some of the values that we would love to see in all of our elected officials. So thank you again for sharing parts of your story with us. I'd love to hear a little bit about what does your work on the city council look like in terms of the committees that you serve on? And are you the
Mhm.
chair or vice chair of any of those committees?
Not yet. I am still in the middle of my first term. I got elected 2 years ago on February 26, 2019, actually on my birthday, which was a wild ride of a 38th birthday. But I serve on 6 committees currently that thankfully are really in line with my values. I serve on housing and real estate, environmental protection and energy, the Pedestrian and Traffic Safety Committee, the newly formed Immigration and Refugee Rights Committee, Contract Compliance and Equity, a committee that is kind of an interesting catch-all called the Special Events, Cultural Affairs, and Recreation Committee, which sounds like a hodgepodge, but it has oversight over Chicago Public Libraries, is the liaison to the Park District, helps create new open space and recreational spaces in Chicago neighborhoods. And finally, the Committee on Committees and Rules, which is that one big 50-person committee that we all serve on. So in a way, it doesn't quite count, but savvy political viewers might know this is the committee you send items to kind of banish them to legislative purgatory. This is when something is being called on the floor of the city council. You always know as an alderman what committee you want something to be sent to. I might ask that something's going to housing and real estate, but any one of your colleagues, if they're trying to sidetrack a piece of legislation, can simply call out in the moment budget or finance. And if 2 committees are called for any piece of legislation, then it goes to the rules committee. And then you need to begin the process of trying to get the chair of that committee to release it and have it re-referred to a preferred committee where it can begin the process of hopefully getting passed.
I appreciate your insight into some of what it sounds like more of your day to day work as an alderman would look like related to these particular committees. So, thinking about the operation of the city council, what, if any, changes would you like to see made in this larger committee that, has so much work that it does for our city?
It's a few things, really. Like, I know that a lot of us are starting to talk about why does the Committee on Rules actually exist? Except for instance, like a place to waylay legislation. I think it would benefit us to have more productive means for re-referring legislation when it's called on. I think it would be very beneficial to make it easier for constituents and residents of Chicago to view the voting records of their aldermen. This has been deeply frustrating for me, uh, not only as an alderman, but for the 20 something years when I wasn't. You can look up on the clerk's page any piece of legislation, see what stage it is in being passed on. What you can't find is how did aldermen vote on this issue? So I think being able to make that change would be really important, a step that we can take in modernizing the function of the city council. I think even as we go back to in person trying to create more opportunities for community participation in our council meetings feels really valuable. I think it's been beneficial for a lot of people to not have to get themselves downtown to be able to publicly participate in these meetings. Um, those are some of the things, but I also think it would be valuable to move to a system, and I've started talking to my colleagues about this, where the membership of a committee um, elects within their membership the chair of that committee rather than having those essentially appointed for us by the mayor. I think that would allow these committees to operate with much more independence than they currently do.
And you highlighted some key issues around transparency and equity. So I want to ask a little bit about a topic that you referred to earlier around gerrymandering, because the league has long supported having an independent commission draw ward boundaries rather than aldermen determining them. Now, would you support this idea of creating this independent commission to draw this next set of ward boundaries? And if so, what would you want to see as some key elements? And if you don't support it, can you tell us a little bit about why?
I think it would definitely be open to an independent commission drawing our ward boundaries. I think the challenges are, how do you actually establish independence? So like going back to first, like the fact that this would be a change made by the state general assembly rather than the council, like that's a first point to consider. But then the commission that we're talking about, who is appointing them? So for instance, if we were in a place where, like most commissions that exist in the city of Chicago, all of the members are appointed by the mayor, well, that's not really independent. At that point, like it's even a greater concern to aldermen that they're going to get boxed out of their ward or even mapped out of their ward, as Bob Fioretti, the previous second ward alderman, was, than it is before. Um, if we had a process that was going to be both independent, that it was going to push for more contiguous wards, and was also going to think critically about racial equity, making sure that minority populations in Chicago felt like they were fairly represented within the ward maps. I think that's something that a lot of aldermen would be willing to consider. I think the challenge is there are a lot of doubts within council in terms of whether independence, transparency, racial equity would be values that a commission would take really seriously.
So, thinking about what you've shared around how to truly make a commission independent, what do you think would be one way that we could draw more equitable maps?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think like for the city of Chicago, for instance, like we're roughly a third Latino, a third Black, a third white. And I know that it's a broad generalization, but I think being able to draw maps that roughly created minority majority wards. I know that we don't want to segregate folks, but folks also want to believe that there are aldermen on the city council that represent their experience, their backgrounds, their stories, their communities. I think that's really important. I think a commission that, again, was committed to more contiguous boundaries also feels important. I look to some of my colleagues up along the coast, for instance, of Lake Michigan. Like my colleague in the 49th Ward, Maria Haddon, represents Rogers Park. Harry Osterman in the 48th represents Edgewater. I think many of us would benefit, and arguably our constituents would benefit from more aldermen being able to represent whole communities. Um, that's a strong consideration, something that whether it's commission, independent commission, whether it's my colleagues, I hope that we're all taking these matters really seriously.
Absolutely. And I encourage viewers to consider how they are keeping up with redistricting as we continue to gain insight into census data and keep talking about this really important issue.
May I add one more point on that, Hannah? Hold your alderman accountable on this. Like, I can guarantee you, your alderperson is thinking right now about the boundaries for where their ward may or may not be.
Mhm.
Ask them about that. Reach out to them. If you have a group of uh, folks in your ward who want to inquire, who want to get involved in this process, reach out to your alderman. Have a conversation about it. I assure you, hopefully you'll find their insights really enlightening, and maybe you have insights to bring to the process as well.
So you shared one way that we could hold our aldermen accountable would be to get in contact with them. So what would you recommend to constituents to get in contact with you or to get in contact with other, I appreciate your use of the term alder people, in holding them accountable and ensuring that we do feel connected to our elected officials?
Well, I can tell you, most aldermen, myself included, have aldermanic ward nights. For myself, it's every second and fourth Thursday of the month from 4 to 8. We've been doing it by phone right now. Hopefully, we'll be going back to in person when it's safe. But any individual or group can come in to speak with me on any issue. It's kind of like no holds barred. Like, we have like real meaningful conversations. That is one route for it. Um, I can tell you, I thought it was a cliche before I was an alderman, but when you get 5 calls about something in a day to your staff, to you, that feels like something you need to respond to. I would never ignore the meaningfulness of reaching out to your aldermanic office by phone, even more than by email, because the phone, like, we really need to engage with those folks. I hear about all of those phone calls from my staff. And then just like requesting a meeting. I know this might seem like common sense, baseline democracy stuff, but it really works.
Mhm. So emailing is one option, but you're recommending reaching out to your aldermen via phone or by attending these forums to feel more connected and to hold people
Mhm.
accountable as some of the ways that
Yeah.
constituents can become more involved.
Yeah. I mean, what is your alderman's process, for instance, on zoning decisions?
Mhm.
Do they have a community-based process? Is it the kind of thing where you're only invited to a community meeting after everything is essentially fully baked? Think about the process you would like to see in terms of democratic accountability, transparency in your ward. And then if it doesn't already exist there, push for it. Be that kind of advocate. Try to change the systems that already exist in the ward where you're represented.
And it sounds like that was part of your story as well and how you got involved in the city. So I'm going to transition us now to another topic, though. I've really enjoyed hearing what you've shared so far in terms of redistricting, which is, of course, a big issue right now. But I also want to talk a little bit about the idea of ranked choice voting. So
Mhm.
at present, when a candidate for mayor or alderman does not receive at least 50% plus one vote in the February election, the top two vote getters are on the ballot in a runoff in the following April. So first, I want to share with our viewers a little bit of insight into ranked choice voting. So, ranked choice voting is an alternative to a runoff April election that is currently being used in Chicago when, like I said, a candidate for an office does not receive 50% plus one votes in the February election. Ranked choice voting is an alternative system where voters would be able to rank candidates in order of preference. And if a candidate receives more than half of the first choices, that candidate wins, just as happens now in Chicago. But if there was no majority winner after counting those first choices, the race is decided instead by an instant runoff in some sense. The candidate with the fewest votes would be eliminated, and voters who pick that candidate as number one will then have their second choice vote allocated to the remaining candidates. And this process would continue until there is a majority winner. So, Alderman, would you be supportive of using ranked choice voting next February to determine the winner in lieu of the current runoff system we have?
I would definitely be game for exploring what that would look like in aldermanic and mayoral elections. I can tell you, we currently use ranked choice voting for some of our democratic processes here in the First Ward. First Ward residents, if they're watching, can participate in our participatory budgeting process for the 1.5 million we get in infrastructure dollars. And in that case, we actually do use a ranked choice ballot for folks to weigh in on. Do you want to see street resurfacing, tree planting, bicycle infrastructure, down through these categories? And we genuinely use those ballot results to determine how we're going to be moving forward with infrastructure projects. So there's a great benefit to ranked choice ballots. I think I would want to see what that system looked like on a municipal level before I said like a firm yes or no, but absolutely open to it.
Excellent, because ranked choice voting is being used in a variety of ways across the country. So it would be really exciting to think through how could we use what is termed in many ways a more equitable voting option potentially here in the city. Now, I want to ask you a little bit about some of your initiatives. And if the league wanted to support some of these initiatives, what steps would you want us to take in supporting the work you're doing for your constituents?
Some of the work that we're doing, I think, is really important towards a more equitable, sustainable Chicago. But if I could ask about one thing, something that I was slowed down on, it's actually the one thing I've put forward that was sent to the Rules Committee that we finally got out and am trying to move forward. So my office put forward a resolution for a hearing on domestic violence. In 2019, we had over 52,000 case reports of domestic violence in the city of Chicago. To put that in perspective, that is more than 15 times as many people who were shot in the city in the same year. And yet we spend only about less than $10 million on all of our domestic violence related programming and resources. We know that this is unfair. We know that this is ignoring the extent of this issue and needlessly putting women's lives in danger. And yet, when I submitted this with more than 15 co-sponsors, first it was sent to the Rules Committee. Now it is waiting in the Public Safety Committee for a hearing to be called. I would greatly appreciate those who are interested in seeing the city more equitably fund programs around domestic violence to reach out either to the Public Safety Committee or to the mayor's office to say it is past due time for a hearing and more equitable funding on domestic and sexual related violence in the city of Chicago. I say this in part, not only because of the statistics, but because my mother was a victim of sexual and domestic violence in her youth. And I feel like this is one of the small things that I can do to honor her memory and hopefully make sure fewer people are having the deeply traumatic childhood that my mom had.
I appreciate your vulnerability and candor, Alderman La Spata, especially considering how domestic violence has only increased during this time of COVID, and the fact that domestic violence, of course, is reported, and we know those numbers, but there is a whole set of domestic violence instances that are not reported. And so you had mentioned reaching out to the mayor's office and the public safety committee. Can you highlight for viewers, how can they do that? How can they get in contact with those entities to inform themselves and to contribute to this work that you're discussing?
I'm probably not at liberty to give out the mayor's cell phone number, but I will say the chair of the Public Safety Committee is Alderman Chris Taliaferro. I'm reaching out to him as well, but I definitely think it behooves him to hear both from his constituents as well as anyone in this city who cares about domestic violence and wants to see anyone um, feel safe and stable in their homes.
Excellent. So one way that the league could support this particular initiative would be to reach out to this particular alderman and share our support of the work that you're doing.
I would appreciate it tremendously.
Awesome. So as we start coming to the end, I would love to hear from you. What are several things that you would like to get done or at least get started during the remainder of your term, which will end in 2023?
A great question. That's a great question. Um, I think we're trying to find ways to promote affordability and affordable housing in the city of Chicago. Some of that is things we're working on at the state level in terms of creating new property tax incentives. Some of it is rolling out effectively things that we've already passed. For instance, the city's new accessory dwelling unit ordinance that creates a new streamlined path to creating coach houses, basement apartments. It could be a game-changing tool for reinvesting certain communities with affordable housing. So I'm really excited for that. I'm excited for some of the programs we're looking at around industrial development and making that more sustainable. Don't want to take jobs out of the city, but we need to find ways to reduce the pollution and emission impacts in the city. The last thing, man, because I'm going to be hopefully still alive, but definitely feeling some of the worst impacts of climate change. The steps that we take now need to be comprehensive and bold. And so working on that now and hopefully in the future is important. We're working with the city's new chief sustainability officer, Angela Tovar, on a host of policies broadly called decarbonization. So how do we look at our building stock in Chicago, which is responsible for about 69% of all of our emissions, about north of 20 million metric tons of carbon put into the atmosphere every year, and start to decarbonize, reduce our reliance on polluting energy sources. So that's a big work. I don't think we're going to get all the way there by 2023, which makes me hope people will give me a second term to continue this work, but we'll see what happens.
Well, Alderman, thank you so much for being with us today. I am feeling incredibly energized from our conversations. And I would love to ask you if you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers before I wrap us up.
I would only say I am so proud for a long time to have known members of the League of Women Voters. I think you all make clear, but it's always worth reasserting, democracy is so much more than what we do on election day. Democracy truly is everything that we do on the other 364 days of the year. So please, whether it is on the municipal, state, or federal level, find ways to exercise those democratic values, to exercise the power to make change in your community. We're always looking for those kinds of residents.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone viewing today's interview. We hope that you share this link with family and friends. And we hope that you'll consider registering for our event next week on Thursday, March 18th at 6 p.m. Our interview will be with Alderman Roderick Sawyer of the 6th Ward. Thank you again, Alderman La Spata, for your time and for your insight and for your story. And I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you.